Millionaire discovered the waitress was sleeping with his triplets in the barn. The reason will make you cry. The storm hit Meadowridge like God's own fury. Ethan Caldwell barely felt the rain slashing his face as he ran across the muddy field toward the old barn. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from the sprint, but from the silent screaming through the baby monitors clutched in his white-knuckled grip. Static, nothing but dead air where 3 tiny heartbeats should have been. The barn door fought him, swollen from the downpour, but he shouldered through and swept his flashlight across the darkness. Hay bales, rusted tools, a tractor that hadn't run since his grandfather's time. Then the beam caught something that stopped him cold. A nest of blankets in the far corner, and huddled in the middle of it, shaking like a leaf, was Daisy Carter with his 3 babies pressed against her chest. "What the hell are you doing with my kids?" The words came out harder than he meant. Somewhere between terror and rage, Daisy jerked awake, instinctively curling tighter around Noah, Liam, and Ellie. Her eyes went wide in the flashlight beam, those pale green eyes that always seemed to be looking at something nobody else could see. "The nursery window," she stammered, her voice rough and small. "It was open. They were crying and crying. And nobody came, and I couldn't let them freeze." Ethan stepped closer, and that's when he saw it. Her lip was split, blood dried at the corner of her mouth. Her arms were shaking so hard he could see it from 6 feet away, and she wasn't wearing a coat. Just that threadbare diner uniform with the name tag hanging crooked. For 8 months, Ethan had been running on fumes and coffee, moving through his days like a ghost in his own life. Everything after Claire died had blurred together. Lawyers, meetings, paperwork that never ended. The mansion had become a mausoleum of empty cribs and silent rooms, and he'd let it happen. Let himself disappear into the numbness, because feeling anything at all was like swallowing broken glass. He'd barely noticed when Madison Pierce moved in, his fiancée now, though he couldn't remember proposing. She'd just sort of materialized after the funeral, elegant and capable, offering to help with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Everyone said he was lucky to have her, that the babies needed a mother figure, that Claire would have wanted him to move on, but Claire was gone. And these 3 tiny humans were all he had left of her. "How long have you been out here?" His voice came out softer this time. "I don't know, maybe an hour." Daisy looked down at the babies, and something in her expression made Ethan's chest tighten. It was the way she held them, not like someone who'd grabbed them in panic, but like someone who'd done it 100 times before, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Liam made a small noise in his sleep, and Daisy adjusted him without thinking, her hand cupping his head with the kind of gentleness that came from instinct, not practice. "The monitors failed," Ethan said, more to himself than to her. "I should have checked the batteries, Mr. Caldwell." "Ethan." She blinked at him. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I know how this looks, but I swear I was just trying to help." When I saw that window open and heard them crying, her voice cracked. Nobody should cry like that without someone coming. Something about the way she said it made him wonder if she was talking about the babies or herself. He'd hired Daisy 3 months ago, though he couldn't remember making that decision either. One day she just appeared at the house, part of the rotating staff Madison had brought in to help with the triplets, the diner girl from town who lived in that rusted-out trailer off Highway 191, the one people talked about in whispers. Poor thing, no family, raised in foster care, never quite belonged anywhere. He'd barely looked at her twice, but the babies had noticed. It had been Madison who'd pointed it out first, her voice honey-sweet with an edge he'd been too tired to catch. "Have you seen how the triplets react to her? It's almost like they know her," and it was true. Noah, who screamed through every diaper change, went quiet when Daisy picked him up. Ellie, who refused bottles from everyone, would drink for her, and Liam, who hardly ever smiled, lit up like Christmas morning whenever Daisy walked in the room. Ethan had chalked it up to some people just having a way with kids, but standing here now, watching his 3 babies sleep peacefully against a stranger's chest while a storm raged outside, he felt something shift in his gut, something that might have been recognition or might have been fear. "Let's get you all inside," he said, shrugging off his jacket and draping it over her shoulders. "Can you walk?" Daisy nodded, but when she tried to stand, her legs nearly gave out. Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her, and together they made their way back across the field. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and through the nursery window he could see a light on that definitely hadn't been on 10 minutes ago. Madison stood in the doorway as they approached, her silk robe perfect despite the hour. Blonde hair smooth as glass. "Oh my God. You found them." She pressed a hand to her chest, the picture of relief. Daisy, what were you thinking? You could have been arrested for kidnapping. She saved them, Ethan said, hearing the edge in his own voice. The window was open. They could have. The window wasn't open when I checked at midnight. Madison's eyes, ice blue and calculating, fixed on Daisy. I always double-check the locks. You know that. Daisy's jaw tightened. But she didn't argue, just stood there dripping on the marble floor, holding 3 sleeping babies like they were made of spun glass, while Madison's gaze stripped her down to nothing. Let me take them, Madison said, reaching for Noah. But the baby whimpered the second her hands got close, and Daisy instinctively pulled back. They're sleeping. I can put them down. I think you've done enough for one night. Madison's smile never wavered, but something cold flashed in her eyes. Ethan, why don't you help Daisy get cleaned up? I'll handle the children. Ethan looked between the 2 women. Madison, perfect and poised. Daisy shaking and small, and felt that shift in his gut again, like tectonic plates grinding together deep underground, right before an earthquake splits the world open. Actually, he heard himself say, Daisy can put them down. She's already got them settled. Madison's smile froze just for a second. Just long enough for Ethan to see the mask slip. Then it was back in place, smooth as ever, of course. Whatever you think is best, darling. Daisy carried the triplets upstairs without another word. And Ethan watched her go. This invisible girl who'd somehow become the only one his children trusted behind him. He felt Madison's presence like ice down his spine. We need better security, she said softly, for the children's safety. Yeah, Ethan said. But he wasn't thinking about security. He was thinking about an open window and 3 babies crying in the dark, and a girl who'd risked everything to make sure they weren't alone. He was thinking about the way Madison's face had looked when Daisy wouldn't hand over Noah, and for the first time in 8 months, Ethan Caldwell started paying attention. Daisy had learned early that being invisible was safer than being seen. The trailer park off Highway 191 wasn't much. 12 units arranged in a horseshoe around a patch of dead grass and a dumpster that overflowed every Thursday. Hers was number 7, the one with the crooked steps and the window patched with duct tape. Rent was $400 a month, which sounded cheap until you were counting quarters from tip jars and praying your car would start one more time. She'd lived there for 3 years, ever since aging out of the system at 21. Before that, it had been the Robinsons' house, and before that, the Kowalskis, and before that, a string of places that blurred together into one long stretch of not quite belonging. 8 foster homes in 14 years. She'd stopped unpacking completely after the 5th one. The only thing she'd kept from her mother was the locket. It hung around her neck now as she stood in the trailer's tiny bathroom. Dabbing hydrogen peroxide on her split lip, the silver caught the light, a star-shaped pendant, tarnished and dented, with a photo inside so faded you could barely make out the woman's face. Rose Carter, her mother, gone since 2001, when Daisy was 3 years old. The official story was that Rose had left, just walked away one day, and never came back. But Daisy had spent 21 years feeling that story in her bones. And it had never once felt true. Her mother hadn't left, something had taken her. She touched the locket, a habit she'd had since childhood, and tried not to think about the matching star-shaped medallion she'd found in the Caldwell nursery 2 weeks ago. Tried not to think about what it might mean. Tried not to hope, because hope was dangerous for people like her. The diner opened at 6, which meant Daisy needed to be there by 5:30 to help Buck with prep. She'd been working at the Riverside diner for 4 years, longer than any other job, longer than any foster home. Buck had hired her the day she walked in with nothing but a backpack and $30 to her name. And he'd never once asked about her past. Just gave her an apron and showed her how he liked the coffee brewed. The regulars knew her by name. Morning shift was ranchers and truckers, folks who wanted their eggs runny and their coffee strong. Evening shift brought families and teenagers. Daisy knew everyone's usual order. Remembered birthdays, always had a smile ready even when her feet were screaming and her back felt like it might give out. But she was still invisible, not to be cruel. People in Riverside weren't mean. Mostly, just that she existed in that space where service workers live. Necessary, but forgettable. They'd chat with her while she poured coffee, maybe ask how she was doing. But they'd never invite her to their dinner parties or church socials. She wasn't one of them. She was the girl who brought their food. That's why the Caldwell job had surprised her 3 months ago. Madison Pierce had walked into the diner during lunch rush. All polished perfection in a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Daisy made in 6 months. She'd sat in Daisy's section. Ordered a salad she barely touched, and watched, just watched. with those ice chip eyes that seemed to catalog everything: the way Daisy moved, the way she talked to customers, the way she kept smiling even when Table 4 sent back their burger for the third time. When Daisy brought the check, Madison had said, "How would you like to make real money?" The offer was simple. The Caldwell estate needed extra help with the triplets, nothing permanent, just someone to cover gaps in the schedule. $20 an hour, cash. Daisy had been making $9.50 at the diner. She should have known better, should have felt the trap closing, but she'd been 2 months behind on the electric bill, and her car needed new brakes, and $20 an hour was the kind of money that could change everything. So she'd said yes the first day of the Caldwell mansion. Daisy had felt like she'd walked into a different universe. The house sprawled across 5 acres of prime Wyoming land, all stone and timber and windows that looked out on mountains that went on forever. Inside, everything was cream and white and expensive, the kind of place where you were afraid to touch anything because you might break it just by looking wrong. Madison had given her the tour with that same assessing look from the diner. The babies are on a strict schedule, bottles every 3 hours, naps at 9 and 2. No unnecessary stimulation. Mr. Caldwell is very particular about routine. Daisy had nodded, taking mental notes, trying not to stare at the crystal chandelier in the foyer that probably cost more than her entire trailer. Then Madison had opened the nursery door, and everything changed. 3 cribs lined the far wall, each one dressed in white linen with hand-embroidered names: Noah, Liam, Ellie, 6 months old then, tiny and perfect. With their mother's dark hair and their father's sharp features, they'd been crying when Daisy walked in, that exhausted hiccup and cry of babies who'd been at it too long. "They're colicky," Madison had said, her voice flat. The previous nurse quit. Said they were too difficult, but the second Daisy approached the first crib, something happened. Noah had stopped mid-cry, his eyes pale blue, almost gray, finding hers with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so small. She'd picked him up without thinking, and he'd melted into her shoulder like he'd been waiting for her all along. Then Liam had reached for her through the bars of his crib, making that demanding baby noise that meant now, and Ellie had simply stared, solemn and knowing, until Daisy sat in the rocking chair with all 3 of them somehow arranged in her lap. They'd fallen asleep in under 5 minutes. Madison had stood in the doorway, watching with an expression Daisy couldn't read. "Well," she'd said finally, "I suppose that's settled over the next 3 months." The pattern held. The babies were angels for Daisy and terrors for everyone else. They refused bottles from Madison, screamed through diaper changes with the other staff, and fought sleep like it was their personal enemy. But with Daisy, they were different. Calm, content, like they recognized something in her that nobody else could see. It should have made her happy, should have felt like belonging. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing there was a drop, but not how far down it went. Because Madison noticed, and Madison didn't like things she couldn't control. The subtle sabotage had started about 6 weeks in. Shifts at the diner suddenly got cut. Buck apologetic, saying business was slow. Bills that should have been paid got lost in the mail. The brake job on her car got mysteriously more expensive. Small things, easy to dismiss as bad luck. Then the accusations started. Noah got colic, and Madison suggested maybe Daisy had fed him too fast. Liam ran a fever, and had Daisy washed her hands properly. Ellie wouldn't sleep, and perhaps Daisy was overstimulating her. Each comment delivered with a smile. In front of Ethan, who was too buried in his grief to see the knife behind the kindness, Daisy had learned to keep her head down, to apologize even when she hadn't done anything wrong, to make herself smaller, quieter, more invisible. But the babies saw her, and late at night, when she was alone in her trailer with the locket pressed against her palm, Daisy wondered if maybe that was enough, if maybe, just once, being seen by the people who mattered was worth the risk of everything else. She looked at her reflection, now 24 years old, tip money in her pocket. Split lip from God knows what that happened in the chaos of last night, still invisible to most of the world. But not to Noah, Liam, and Ellie, not to them. The nightmares started 2 weeks after Daisy began working at the mansion. Not her nightmares, the babies. She'd be in the nursery for the 2 a.m., feeding, and one of them would wake up screaming, not the normal fussy cry of a hungry infant, but a sound that clawed its way up from somewhere deep and terrified. By the time Daisy got there, they'd be rigid in their cribs, eyes unfocused, like they were seeing something nobody else could. Madison said it was night terrors, normal for their age, nothing to worry about. But Daisy had worked at the diner long enough to know what normal looked like, and this wasn't it. The real warning came on a Thursday. Daisy had arrived for her shift at 8, letting herself in through the kitchen door like always. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of Ethan on a conference call in his study. Madison was supposedly in town getting her nails done. The babies were due to wake from their morning nap any minute. Daisy went to make herself coffee. One of the few perks of the job was the fancy espresso machine. And that's when she saw Madison's office door standing open. Madison never left that door open. The woman was paranoid about her space, keeping it locked even when she was home. Daisy knew she shouldn't look. Knew it was crossing a line, but something pulled her forward anyway. Some instinct she couldn't name. The office was pristine like everything else Madison touched. White desk, white chair, white shelves lined with books that looked like they'd never been opened. But the trash can beside the desk had papers in it, and one of them had a medical logo at the top. Daisy glanced over her shoulder. The house was still quiet. Ethan's voice droned on behind the closed study door. She pulled the paper out. Salt Lake City Medical Center. Patient consultation report. The name at the top made her blood run cold. Claire Caldwell. She scanned the document, her hands starting to shake. Medical terminology she didn't fully understand, but certain words jumped out. Sedation levels, infant exposure, abnormal blood markers. It was dated 3 days before Claire's accident. Daisy folded the paper and shoved it in her pocket, her heart hammering. She shouldn't have taken it, should have left it there. Pretended she'd never seen it, but every instinct was screaming that this mattered, that it meant something. She was halfway to the nursery when she noticed the syringe. It was sitting on the bathroom counter between the nursery and the master bedroom. The kind you'd use for medicine. Empty, but with a few drops of clear liquid still clinging to the inside. Daisy picked it up carefully, wrapped it in a tissue, and tucked it into her other pocket. Her mind was racing now, trying to connect dots that didn't quite fit. Claire had died 8 months ago. The babies were born premature, 3 months before that. This report was from right before the accident. Why would Madison have it? Why would she throw it away? The baby started crying then, pulling her back to the moment. Daisy hurried to the nursery and found all 3 of them awake and fussy. The way they always were after Madison had been with them alone. She picked up Noah first, and he immediately buried his face in her shoulder. His skin felt warm, not fever warm, but that particular heated flush babies got after crying too hard for too long. Liam was the same, only Ellie seemed calm. Watching Daisy with those serious eyes, it always made her feel like the baby was judging her somehow as she changed Noah's diaper. Something glinted on the floor near the rocking chair. Daisy bent down and picked it up, a medallion, silver, star-shaped, identical to the locket around her neck. Her breath caught, she turned it over in her palm, feeling the weight of it. The design was exact 5 points, each one slightly curved, with a tiny engraving in the center that had worn smooth with age, the same engraving her mother's locket had. Where had this come from? She'd cleaned this room yesterday, and it definitely hadn't been here. Had Madison dropped it? But why would Madison have something that matched a piece of jewelry from Daisy's missing mother, Daisy? She jumped. Nearly dropping the medallion, Ethan stood in the doorway, looking exhausted in a way that seemed permanent now. His hair was a mess, and he had that slightly lost expression he always wore. Like he wasn't quite sure how he'd ended up in his own life. "Sorry," she said, closing her fist around the star. "Didn't hear you come up? How are they doing?" He didn't come into the room. Never did, actually. Just stood at the threshold, like the nursery was a country he didn't have a visa for. "Good, just woke up from their nap." She kept her voice light, normal, even though her heart was still racing from what she'd found. Madison said they've been having trouble sleeping. They sleep fine. The words came out sharper than she meant. Daisy softened her tone. "I mean, they have their fussy moments. But that's normal for babies." Ethan studied her for a long moment, and for the first time, she felt like he was actually seeing her. Not just looking past her to check on the babies, but really seeing her. It made her nervous. "The window last night," he said finally. "You're sure it was open?" "Positive. That's why I went looking for them. I heard them crying from outside and saw it was open, almost a foot." His jaw tightened. Madison swears she locked it. Madison's lying. Daisy wanted to say it so badly her teeth ached. But she'd learned long ago that nobody believed the poor girl over the rich woman. Nobody ever did. Maybe she forgot, Daisy offered instead. "It happens, yeah," but he didn't sound convinced. He looked at the babies, something cracking in his expression. They really are okay. Not sick or anything. They're perfect, and she meant it. They were perfect when they weren't being slowly poised by whatever the hell Madison was doing to them. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? The pieces were there. Medical reports about sedation, empty syringes, babies who slept too deeply and woke up screaming, Madison's insistence that they were difficult, colicky, problem children who needed special handling. Madison was drugging them. The realization hit Daisy like ice water, and she had to force herself to keep her expression neutral while Ethan was watching. She arranged Ellie in her crib with shaking hands, tucking the blanket around her tiny body. "Mr. Caldwell, Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Has anyone else noticed? Do the babies act differently with different people?" His brow furrowed. "What do you mean they're just really calm with me? But Madison says they're fussy all the time, and I'm wondering if maybe..." She stopped, chickening out at the last second. How could she say, "I think your fiancé is poisoning your children," without sounding completely insane? If maybe what? If maybe they're just adjusting, she finished lamely. To everything after losing their mom, the pain that crossed his face made her instantly regret bringing it up. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe." He left without another word. And Daisy sank into the rocking chair with her head in her hands. The syringe and medallion felt like they were burning holes through her pockets. The medical report crinkled against her hip. She needed to tell someone. Needed to show someone what she'd found. But who would believe her? She was nobody. A diner waitress who lived in a trailer and had no family, no connections. Nothing but a name people forgot 5 minutes after learning it. Liam made a small sound in his sleep, drawing her attention. She watched his chest rise and fall, so small and fragile, all three of them, depending on adults to keep them safe. And the adult who should have been protecting them was the same one slowly destroying them. Daisy pulled out her phone and took pictures of the medical report. Then she wrapped the syringe more carefully and tucked it into her purse. The medallion she kept in her palm, thumb rubbing over the familiar shape. She didn't know what it all meant yet. Didn't know how to connect her missing mother to Madison, to Claire, to these 3 babies who felt like they belonged to her in a way she couldn't explain. But she was going to find out, even if it killed her. The sabotage escalated slowly, like water rising an inch at a time, until you realized you were drowning. First, it was Daisy's schedule at the diner. Buck called her in on a Tuesday, looking uncomfortable in a way that made her stomach drop before he even spoke. "Listen, kiddo, I gotta cut your hours. Just temporary, you understand, business has been slow." Daisy had glanced around the packed diner, every booth full, the counter lined with regulars. Slow. Buck wouldn't meet her eyes. "Owner's orders. I'm sorry." She'd gone from 4 shifts a week to 2. Then 1. Her tips, which had been keeping her afloat, dried up like rain in summer. The electric bill came due. Then the lot rent. Her car started making a noise that meant expensive, and she couldn't afford expensive. The thing about being poor was that it only took one domino to knock down all the others. At the mansion, Madison's attacks grew sharper, more calculated, always in front of Ethan, always wrapped in concern. "Daisy, honey, did you remember to burp Noah after his bottle? He's been spitting up so much lately. Are you feeling all right? You look tired. I hope you're not bringing any germs around the babies. I noticed Liam's diaper rash is getting worse. Maybe we should go over proper change-in techniques again." Each comment landed like a paper cuts, maul, stinging, designed to make Daisy doubt herself. And Ethan absorbed it all with those hollow eyes, nodding along. Too buried in his own grief to question whether any of it was true, Daisy started documenting everything. She bought a cheap notebook from the drugstore and kept it hidden in her purse. Every time she fed the babies, she wrote down the time and what they ate. Every diaper change, every nap, every temperature check. If Madison was going to accuse her of negligence, Daisy would have proof that she'd done everything right. She also started paying attention to patterns. The babies always slept abnormally deeply after Madison gave them their bottles. Not the healthy, peaceful sleep of content infants, but that limp, heavy unconsciousness that looked wrong, and they always woke up irritable. Sometimes with dilated pupils that took hours to return to normal. Daisy began arriving early for her shifts, quietly watching from the hallway. She saw Madison measure out formula with meticulous precision, saw her add something from a small brown bottle she kept in her pocket. The movements were quick, practiced, easy to miss if you weren't looking on a Wednesday morning. Daisy managed to check that bottle while Madison was in the shower. The label had been peeled off, but she unscrewed the cap and sniffed. Sweet, slightly chemical, not formula, not vitamin drops. She took a photo of it with her phone, hands shaking so badly she had to take 3 shots before one came out clear. That afternoon, Madison called her into the office. "Sit down, Daisy, we need to talk." The chair across from Madison's pristine white desk felt like an electric chair. Daisy sat, trying to keep her expression neutral, while her heart tried to jackhammer through her ribs. Madison smiled, but it was the smile of a shark who'd just spotted blood in the water. "I've been getting some concerning reports about your performance." From who? That's not important. What matters is that the baby's health seems to be declining, and you're the common factor. She slid a folder across the desk. "Noah's been having digestive issues. Liam had a fever last week. Ellie hasn't been meeting her weight gain targets." Daisy opened the folder. Medical notes, dates, symptoms, all real, all documented, but the implication was clear. "This is your fault." "I follow their schedule exactly," Daisy said, keeping her voice steady. "Every feeding, every diaper change. I have records you keep yourself." Madison's eyebrow arched. "How convenient I keep them because you keep accusing me of messing up." The words came out harder than she'd intended, and Madison's expression shifted, just for a second. The mask dropped and something cold and calculating looked out through those ice chip eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded concern. "Daisy, I'm not attacking you. I'm trying to help. The babies are struggling. And I think maybe this job is too much for you. There's no shame in admitting you're overwhelmed." "I'm not overwhelmed. You're living in a trailer, working 2 jobs, barely keeping your head above water. That kind of stress affects performance. Maybe it's time to consider whether this arrangement is really working." "She's gonna fire me." The realization hit like a punch to the gut. If Daisy lost this job, she lost her only window into what was happening to these babies, lost her only chance to protect them. "Please," Daisy heard herself say, hating how small her voice sounded. "Just give me a chance to prove I can do better." Madison studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, one more chance. But Daisy," she leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something that could have been kindness or could have been a threat. "If anything else goes wrong with those babies, we'll have to make some difficult decisions. Do you understand?" Daisy understood perfectly. That night, she sat in her trailer with everything she'd collected spread across the tiny kitchen table. The medical report about Claire, photos of the brown bottle, her notebook full of observations, the syringe wrapped in tissue, the star-shaped medallion that matched her mother's locket. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to take to the police or social services. All circumstantial, all easily explained away by a woman with money and connections and a believable story about a negligent employee making accusations to cover her own failures. Daisy needed more. She started staying later at the mansion, volunteering for overnight shifts when Madison said the babies were too fussy. Madison always accepted with that shark smile, probably thinking she was pushing Daisy closer to breaking. But it gave Daisy access. She found the brown bottle's hiding place, not in Madison's pocket, but in a locked drawer in the bathroom cabinet. She picked the lock with a bobby pin, hands shaking, ears straining for any sound of footsteps. Inside were 3 bottles, all unlabeled. She photographed them, cataloged their positions so she could return everything exactly as it was. She also found receipts. Lots of them, cash payments to a medical supply company in Jackson Hole, consultations with a lawyer whose specialty was trust law and estate planning, email printouts discussing the Caldwell estate's value, the Triplets' inheritance, contingency plans if the children were deemed incapable of inheriting. Her blood ran cold reading that last one. This wasn't just about making the babies difficult. This was about making them sick enough, damaged enough, that someone else could step in and control their inheritance. Madison wasn't trying to be a mother to these children. She was trying to eliminate them as obstacles. Daisy photographed everything, her hands steadier now with fury than they'd been with fear. She was careful, meticulous, returning each document to its exact position. When she finally crept back to the nursery, dawn was breaking through the windows. The babies were stirring, making those soft morning sounds that always made her chest ache. She picked up Ellie first, breathing in that perfect baby smell, feeling the solid warmth of her. "I'm going to protect you," she whispered. "I promise I don't care what it costs." Ellie grabbed her finger and squeezed, and Daisy felt something crack open in her chest. This wasn't about a job anymore. Wasn't even about proving Madison wrong. This was about 3 tiny humans who'd somehow become hers in every way that mattered, even if the whole world said she had no claim to them. and she'd burn the whole world down before she let Madison hurt them. The phone call came at 2 a.m. on a Friday. Daisy jerked awake in her trailer, heart already racing before she was fully conscious. The screen glowed in the darkness. Caldwell residence. "Hello, Daisy." Thank God, Madison's voice was breathless, panicked in a way that sent ice down Daisy's spine. "It's Liam. He's burning up and I can't get his fever down. Can you come?" Daisy was already pulling on jeans. "Did you call his doctor?" "Left a message. Please, I don't know what to do, and he always calms down for you 20 minutes later." Daisy was running up the mansion's front steps. Madison met her at the door in a silk nightgown, mascara smudged like she'd been crying. Behind her, Daisy could hear Liam's screams echoing through the house. "Where's Ethan?" "Denver. Back tomorrow." Madison grabbed her arm. "Please. I've tried everything." Daisy took the stairs 2 at a time in the nursery. Liam was rigid in his crib, face flushed. Screaming himself hoarse, she scooped him up, and he was hot, too hot. The kind of fever that meant hospital, not home remedies. "We need to take him to the ER. I gave him Tylenol an hour ago." "Shouldn't we wait to see if it works?" Madison hovered in the doorway, wringing her hands. "He needs a doctor now." Daisy was already moving toward the door with Liam clutched against her chest. "Get the diaper bag." Madison didn't move. "Maybe we should wait for Ethan too now." "Madison," something in Daisy's voice must have cut through, because Madison finally snapped into motion. They made it to the hospital in 15 minutes, Daisy holding Liam in the back seat while Madison drove with white knuckles on the wheel. The ER doctor examined Liam, ran tests, asked questions. The fever broke around 4 a.m., brought down by 4 fluids and stronger medication. "Ear infection," the doctor said, "common in babies. Nothing to panic about, but good thing they'd brought him in." Madison cried with relief, thanking the doctor profusely. She held Liam while they waited for discharge papers, cooing at him, the picture of a concerned mother figure. But Daisy had seen Madison's face in the car, seen the calculation behind the panic, the way she'd hesitated before agreeing to come to the hospital, like she'd been weighing options, running scenarios like she'd expected this. They got back to the mansion at dawn, Ethan called while Madison was putting Liam back down. And Daisy heard Madison's version of events through the nursery monitor. It was terrifying, darling. His fever just spiked out of nowhere. Thank God Daisy was here, though, honestly. "I'm wondering if she might have missed warning signs earlier in the day. The doctor said ear infections don't develop that quickly." Daisy's hands clenched into fists. I know, she means well. But these babies need professional care, not just someone who's good at cuddling them. Maybe we should look into a real nurse," the conversation continued. But Daisy stopped listening. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app, fingers flying across the screen. 2:0 a.m. Madison calls. Says Liam has fever too. 20 a.m. Arrive at house. Liam burning up. Approx 104F. Madison claims gave Tylenol at 1 a.m. but hesitant to go to hospital. Why call me instead of 911? Why wait an hour before calling anyone? She was adding timestamps when she heard Madison's heels clicking down the hallway. Daisy shoved the phone in her pocket and pretended to be organizing baby clothes. "You can go home now," Madison said from the doorway. Her voice was pleasant, but her eyes were hard. "I'll handle the rest of the morning. I don't mind staying, I insist." "You've done enough." It wasn't a request. Daisy gathered her things, checking each baby one more time before she left. They were all sleeping peacefully now, but something felt wrong. The air in the nursery felt charged, like the pressure drop before a storm. At the trailer, she couldn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table and went through her phone, reviewing all the photos and notes she'd collected over the past 3 weeks. A pattern was emerging, ugly and clear. Every emergency happened when Ethan was away. Every crisis seemed to escalate right when Madison needed Daisy to look negligent. And the babies were getting sicker, not better, despite everyone's best efforts. Daisy opened her laptop and started searching. Munchausen by proxy, medical child abuse, symptoms of infant sedation. The articles made her stomach turn. Parents who poisoned their children for attention. Caregivers who induced illness to appear heroic. The warning signs matched too perfectly. Unexplained symptoms, parent eager to pursue medical treatment. Child improving when separated from parent, symptoms that didn't match any clear diagnosis. She found a case from Montana 3 years ago. A stepmother who'd been slowly poisoning her husband's children to secure an inheritance. Another from Idaho, a nanny who'd drugged babies to make them sleep through her shifts. They were all caught eventually, but not before children died. Daisy's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone. She needed to call someone. The police, child services, somebody. But what would she say? That she had a feeling that she'd found some bottles and stolen medical records and had a theory they'd laugh her out of the station, or worse, they'd tell Madison, and then Daisy would lose access completely. She needed irrefutable proof, something that couldn't be explained away that afternoon. She went to the one person in Riverside who'd always been straight with her. Buck was in the diner kitchen prepping for dinner rush. He looked up when Daisy came in through the back door, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Kiddo, you look like hell. I need advice." She perched on a stool, exhaustion hitting her all at once, hypothetically. If you knew someone was hurting kids but you couldn't prove it, what would you do? Buck set down his knife, his expression going serious. Hypothetically, yeah, I'd ask myself if I was sure enough to risk everything, because once you make that kind of accusation, there's no taking it back. He studied her. This is about the Caldwell babies. Daisy's throat tightened. "I can't talk about it. You just did." Buck wiped his hands on his apron. "Listen, I've known you for years. You're the most reliable person I've ever hired. You don't make stuff up, and you don't cause drama. So if you're asking me this question, I believe you've got a reason. But what do? I don't have proof. Not real proof. Then you get it carefully, and you make damn sure you're right before you pull that trigger. Because rich people don't forgive poor people for calling them out." He paused. "You need help." The offer made her eyes burn. "I can't drag you into this." A little late for that. Buck pulled out his phone. "My sister-in-law works for Child Protective Services in Jackson. Let me make a call. See what kind of evidence you'd need, off the record," while Buck stepped outside. Daisy sat in the empty kitchen and let herself feel the weight of what she was doing. This was real now, not just her suspicions and stolen photographs, but actual steps toward exposure. If she was wrong, she'd destroy her own life. If she was right and she did nothing, 3 babies would die. Buck came back in, his expression grim. "She says you need documentation. Medical records showing a pattern, eyewitness testimony, physical evidence of the substance being used. And even then, it's an uphill battle if the accused has money for good lawyers. So, basically impossible, basically." He hesitated, but she also said, "If you genuinely believe children are in immediate danger, you call 911, don't wait for perfect evidence, let the professionals sort it out." Daisy nodded, but they both knew that wasn't how it worked. Not for people like her. Call 911 on someone like Madison Pierce, and you'd be the one who ended up investigated for wasting police time. She left the diner with Buck's words echoing in her head. Make damn sure you're right. That night, she made a decision. She'd plant her phone in the nursery, recording overnight. She'd get video evidence of Madison doctoring the bottles. It was risky, possibly illegal, but it was the only way. She texted Madison, "Can I pick up an extra overnight shift this week? Need the money?" The response came within minutes. "Tomorrow night works. Ethan will be in Cheyenne until Thursday." Of course he would be. Daisy stared at her phone screen, watching the cursor blink. Tomorrow night. She'd either get the proof she needed or lose everything trying. Either way, the waiting was over. The social worker arrived at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, unannounced and official. Daisy was in the nursery changing Ellie's diaper when she heard the doorbell, heard Madison's startled greeting, heard the words that made her blood run cold. "We've received a report of concern regarding the children in this household," she finished, fastening Ellie's onesie with shaking hands, and went to the top of the stairs. Below, Madison stood in the foyer with a woman in a gray pantsuit, clipboard in hand. "State ID clipped to her belt. I don't understand," Madison was saying, her voice perfectly pitched between confusion and concern. "The babies are fine. They're with their caregiver right now, Daisy. Could you bring the children down? Please." It was a setup. Daisy knew it the second she saw Madison's face, that careful blend of worry and innocence that she'd perfected. Whatever was about to happen, Madison had orchestrated it. Daisy carried the triplets downstairs one by one, settling them in their playpen while the social worker introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson and began asking questions. How long had Daisy worked here? What were her qualifications? Had she noticed any concerning behaviors? "Actually," Madison interjected softly, "that's something I've been meaning to discuss." She looked at Daisy with what might have been pity if you didn't know better. "I hate to do this, but I've been documenting some concerns about Daisy's performance, Mrs. Patterson's pen hovered over her clipboard. "What kind of concerns?" "Small things at first. Missed feedings, incorrect medication dosages. But then yesterday, I found these in her bag." Madison pulled out a Ziploc bag containing 3 prescription bottles. "Pediatric sedatives, not prescribed to any of the children." The world tilted. "Those aren't mine." Daisy's voice came out. "Strangle it." I've never seen those before. They were in your purse. Daisy, in the kitchen. I was looking for my phone, and Madison's eyes glistened with tears. I wanted to talk to you first. Give you a chance to explain, but then Mrs. Patterson called about a report, and I realized this was bigger than I thought. What report? Daisy looked at the social worker. Who called you? The report was anonymous, Mrs. Patterson said carefully, but it alleged that the children were being oversedated and that their primary caregiver was showing signs of instability. Madison pulled out her phone. I have security footage. From last week, Daisy tried to access my office at 3 a.m. When I asked her about it, she claimed she heard a noise. But she swiped through screens. She was clearly looking for something. I heard Liam crying. Daisy said desperately, I thought the monitor was malfunctioning. Liam was fine. I checked in myself. Madison's voice was gentle, reasonable. Daisy, I know you've been under a lot of stress. The money troubles, the late nights. Maybe this job was too much, and you needed help sleeping through the baby's crying. The implication landed like a slap. Mrs. Patterson was writing now, her pen scratching rapidly across the page. I didn't drug those babies, Daisy said, hearing how her voice shook and hating it. You did. I have proof. The bottles, the medical records, everything. You broke into my office and stole my personal documents. Madison's eyes went wide. Mrs. Patterson, I didn't want to mention this, but Daisy has been acting paranoid for weeks, making wild accusations, claiming I was trying to hurt the children. I thought she was just exhausted, but now, those documents prove that someone's been sedating the babies, Daisy insisted, the hospital reports. The medication orders show her, Madison said quietly. Daisy reached for her purse. Hands fumbling, she pulled out her phone, unlocked it, opened the Photos app. Empty. Every single photograph she'd taken, the medical records, the brown bottles, the receipts, all gone, deleted. I had pictures, she whispered. They were right here. Madison looked at Mrs. Patterson with an expression of profound sadness. She's been doing this for days, taking photos of random things, claiming they're evidence of some conspiracy. I thought about letting her go, but I felt bad. She's had such a hard life, and she's so good with the babies when she's having a good day. When did you go through my phone? Daisy's voice was rising now, panic clawing up her throat. When did you delete? I've never touched your phone. Daisy, Madison reached out like she might touch her arm, and Daisy jerked back. Honey, I think you might be having some kind of episode. The stress, the lack of sleep, it can make you imagine things. Mrs. Patterson stood. I'm going to need to examine the children, and Daisy, I'll need you to submit to a drug test. I'm not on drugs, but even as she said it, Daisy saw how it looked. The stolen medications in her bag, the deleted photos she swore existed, the break-in at 3 a.m., the wild accusations against a woman who seemed nothing but concerned. She'd played right into Madison's hands. The examination took an hour, Mrs. Patterson checked each baby thoroughly while Madison hovered, answering questions about their schedules, their development, their care. The babies were tired, but healthy, no signs of abuse or neglect. Noah even smiled at Mrs. Patterson, which seemed to seal Daisy's fate. I'm recommending your immediate removal from this position, Mrs. Patterson told Daisy in the kitchen afterward. Given the serious nature of these allegations and the medications found in your possession, I'm also recommending a police investigation, please, Daisy said. And she hated the begging in her voice, but couldn't stop it. Please, just look at the baby's medical records. Look at the pattern of illnesses. It's all there. The children have had normal infant ailments, Mrs. Patterson said, not unkindly. Ear infections, colic, fever. Nothing unusual for triplets born prematurely, because she's been making them sick. Madison was crying now, delicate tears sliding down her perfect face. I'm so sorry, Daisy. I should have gotten you help sooner. I just kept hoping you'd be okay. The security guard arrived then, a man named Tom who'd always been nice to Daisy, who'd chatted with her about his granddaughter. He looked uncomfortable now, avoiding her eyes. Miss Carter, I need to escort you off the property. My things will be gathered and returned to you, Madison said softly. Daisy, I really do hope you get the help you need. Despite everything, I don't wish you any harm. It was the final touch, the gracious victim. Extending sympathy even to her attacker, Daisy looked at the triplets in their playpen. Noah was chewing on a rattle. Liam was dozing. Ellie stared at her with those serious eyes, like she knew exactly what was happening and couldn't do anything about it either. I'll come back for you, Daisy whispered. I promise. Tom's hand was gentle but firm on her elbow. Come on, miss, let's make this easy. The walk to her car felt like a death march. Rain had started falling, cold and mean, turning the gravel driveway to mud. Tom held an umbrella over her, which somehow made it worse. The kindness of a man doing his job. Removing the threat, when she got to her car, she saw Madison watching from the nursery window, backlit and perfect. The babies were nowhere in sight. Daisy sat in her car as rain hammered the roof and let herself break. Great. Gasping sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. She'd lost, Madison had won, and 3 babies who needed her were now completely at the mercy of a woman who wanted them dead. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have left when you had the chance." Daisy stared at it, tears blurring the words. Then she put the car in gear and drove. Because there was nothing else she could do, the trailer had never felt so empty. She sat at the kitchen table, still in her wet clothes, and stared at the locket around her neck. The star-shaped pendant that matched the medallion she'd found in the nursery, the one Madison had taken back, probably destroyed by now. Her mother had disappeared 23 years ago, Rose Carter, nurse. Last seen at the hospital where Claire Caldwell had been involved in some kind of adoption case. The pieces were there, scattered and broken. But Daisy couldn't see the pattern anymore. Couldn't see anything but 3 babies crying in the dark while she sat here. Useless and alone, around midnight, the rain turned to a full storm. Wind howled around the trailer, rattling the windows. Daisy should have been exhausted, but she couldn't stop thinking about the nursery window. Madison always locked it, always checked twice. But if it somehow came open in this storm, and the babies were crying, would anyone hear them? The thought wouldn't let go. Daisy paced her tiny living room, arguing with herself. She'd been banned from the property. Going back would be trespassing. If she got caught, it would only prove Madison right about her being unstable. But if something happened to those babies because she'd done nothing. At 1 a.m., Daisy grabbed her keys and headed for the door. The storm was biblical. Daisy drove through sheets of rain so thick her wipers couldn't keep up. Hands locked on the wheel, heart hammering against her ribs. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane, that she was proving Madison right. That she'd lose everything, that going back to the Caldwell estate was the worst decision she could possibly make. But louder than reason was the image of 3 babies alone in that nursery, with an open window, and a woman who wanted them gone. She parked a quarter-mile down the road and walked the rest of the way, staying in the tree line. The mansion was dark except for a few security lights that barely penetrated the rain. Madison's car was in the driveway. No sign of anyone else. Daisy's clothes were soaked through by the time she reached the side of the house. She crept along the wall, staying low, until she was under the nursery window. It was open at least 6 inches, maybe more, and from inside came the sound of babies crying, that exhausted. Desperate wail that meant they'd been at it for a while. Daisy's chest constricted. She looked around wildly for something to stand on, found an old milk crate by the garden shed, dragged it through the mud. Standing on it, she could just reach the windowsill. She pulled herself up, muscles screaming, and tumbled through onto the nursery floor. All 3 cribs were in chaos. Noah was red-faced and screaming. Liam had cried himself into hiccups. Ellie was making that terrible silent cry where her mouth was open, but no sound came out. "I've got you," Daisy whispered, rushing to the nearest crib. "I've got you, baby. It's okay." She picked up Ellie first, then Noah, trying to hold them both while reaching for Liam. It was impossible. 3 babies, 2 arms, and all of them needed her at once. She grabbed blankets from the cribs, wrapped each baby as quickly as she could, and bundled all 3 against her chest. They couldn't stay here. If Madison found her, it would be over police, arrest. Daisy would never see them again. But she couldn't leave them crying in a room with an open window while a storm raged outside, the barn. She could take them to the barn, just for a little while, just until the storm passed and she could figure out what to do. Getting back through the window with 3 babies was nightmare logistics. Daisy ended up passing them through one at a time, setting each one gently on the wet grass while she climbed out. Then gathering them all back up, her arms burned, rain soaked through the blankets. The babies were crying again, confused and cold. Almost there, she panted, half running across the field. "Just hold on, please, just hold on." The barn door was unlocked, thank God. She shouldered through and found herself in musty darkness that smelled of old hay and machine oil. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her phone to use as a flashlight. But she found a relatively dry corner and made a nest out of horse blankets and burlap sacks. She sat down with her back against the wall and arranged the babies against her chest, 2 on her lap and 1 in the crook of her arm. They were still fussing, but quieter now, responding to her voice, to her heartbeat, to the solid warmth of her body. "You're safe," she whispered, over and over. "You're safe, I promise. Nobody's going to hurt you." Eli's hand found her finger and gripped tight. Noah burrowed into her shoulder. Leah made a small sound and then went quiet, his breathing evening out outside. A storm hammered the barn, wind howled through gaps in the walls, rain drummed on the roof like 1,000 angry fists inside. Daisy held 3 babies who weren't hers, who she had no legal right to, who she'd technically kidnapped, and felt more certain of this choice than anything else in her entire life. Her phone buzzed, low battery warning, she'd forgotten to charge it. Perfect. Time became weird, stretchy. Could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours that she sat there in the dark, listening to the storm, feeling 3 tiny heartbeats against her own. Her mind raced through scenarios, none of them good, best case. She waited until dawn. Brought the babies back, claimed she'd found them outside, and panicked. They'd arrest her anyway, but at least the babies would be alive. Worst case, Madison found them first. Daisy's lip throbbed where it had split. She couldn't even remember when that had happened. Maybe climbing through the window, maybe earlier. Everything was blurring together. Exhaustion and fear, and the surreal reality of sitting in a barn at God knows what hour with 3 stolen babies. Not stolen, saved, but nobody would see it that way. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, a flashlight beam was cutting through the darkness, and a voice was saying her name in a tone somewhere between terror and fury. "What the hell are you doing with my kids, Ethan?" Daisy jerked awake, instinctively curling tighter around the babies. The flashlight blinded her, but she could see his silhouette in the barn doorway, all rigid, backlit by the easing rain. "The window," she stammered, her throat raw. "It was open. They were crying, so you broke in and took them." His voice cracked. "Jesus Christ, Daisy. I could have you arrested for kidnapping. I wasn't kidnapping them, I was protecting them." The words came out too loud, and Noah whimpered. She gentled her voice, rocking him. "Madison left that window open in a storm while the babies were crying. What was I supposed to do? Call someone? Call me? Call the goddamn police?" But he was moving closer now, and the flashlight dipped enough that she could see his face. He looked wrecked, hair wild, eyes bloodshot, like he'd been driving for hours. "I tried to tell you," Daisy said, and she hated that she was crying but couldn't stop. "I tried so hard to tell you something was wrong, and nobody would listen. Madison has been drugging them, making them sick. I had proof. And she deleted it, but planted evidence on me. Got me fired. Madison called me 3 hours ago saying the babies were missing." Ethan interrupted, said she checked on them and they were gone, window wide open. "She thought someone had kidnapped them. She left that window open. You don't know that, yes?" "I do. She's been poisoning them," Ethan, slowly, "making them sick so she can declare them incompetent and take their inheritance." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Check their blood. Check the bottles in Madison's bathroom cabinet. Check the medical records. There's a pattern. I swear to God there's a pattern." Ethan stood there, flashlight wavering, rain dripping from his hair. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at her, holding his children in a nest of blankets in his grandfather's barn at 3 a.m. Then he saw her face, really saw it, the split lip, the exhaustion, the desperate certainty in her eyes. "Show me," he said quietly. "What? Show me what you're talking about." "The bottles, the records, show me." Daisy's throat tightened. "Madison took everything, the photos I had, the documents. She deleted them from my phone. But you remember where they were?" "Yes." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Looking at the babies, they were all awake now, watching him with those solemn eyes. Not crying, just watching. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, come back to the house, we'll check. Madison will." "Madison's not there. She's at the police station filing a missing persons report." His jaw tightened. "Which gives us maybe an hour before she gets back." It was insane, reckless. Exactly the kind of thing that would get them both in trouble if they were wrong. But Daisy saw something shift in Ethan's expression, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself since Claire died. He was finally paying attention. She stood carefully, cradling the babies. "If we do this, you have to be ready for what we find." "I'm ready." Daisy wasn't sure either of them was ready, but she followed him out of the barn anyway. Back toward the mansion, back toward whatever truth was waiting for them in Madison's locked cabinets and hidden bottles. Behind them, something small and white caught the flashlight beam. Daisy glanced back and saw it, an envelope, half buried in the hay where she'd been sitting. "Wait," she bent down, awkward with the babies, and picked it up. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a medical report with Claire Caldwell's name at the top. and a star-shaped medallion that matched her mother's locket exactly. The envelope fell from Daisy's shaking hands, landing in the mud between them. Ethan picked it up, shining his flashlight on the contents, medical records, lab results, and that star-shaped medallion catching the light like a tiny silver promise. Where did this come from? His voice was sharp, confused. I don't know, it was just there. In the hay, Daisy stared at the medallion, but I found one exactly like it in the nursery 3 weeks ago. And my mother, she touched her locket. This was hers. Ethan looked between the two pieces of jewelry, his expression shifting from confusion to something harder. Inside now, they ran across the field, the babies mercifully quiet against Daisy's chest. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and imposing. Ethan unlocked the kitchen door and they tumbled inside, dripping water all over the marble floors. Put him in the playpen, Ethan said, already moving toward the stairs. Madison's bathroom. You said there were bottles, locked cabinet under the sink. He took the stairs 3 at a time. Daisy settled the babies quickly. They were dry-eyed now, watching everything with that unnerving awareness, and followed. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. Ethan was already in Madison's bathroom, cabinet door hanging open. He'd broken the lock. Inside were the bottles Daisy had photographed, along with several others. Ethan grabbed them all, reading labels that weren't there, unscrewing caps to smell contents. These aren't baby vitamins, he said flatly. No. Daisy moved past him to the closet, the one where she'd found receipts. There's more financial documents, emails about the estate. The closet was empty, completely, impossibly empty. Every document, every receipt, gone. She cleaned it out, Daisy whispered. She knew. She knew I'd been here. Ethan was already on his phone. Dr. Morrison, it's Ethan Caldwell. I need you at the house now. I don't care what time it is. My children may have been poised. Yes, I'm serious. 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at Daisy, the medical report. From the envelope, what did it say? She'd barely had time to read it in the barn, but certain phrases had burned themselves into her brain. Something about sedative markers in Claire's blood work. Tested 3 days before the accident. Her voice cracked. Ethan, what if Claire's crash wasn't an accident? The color drained from his face. Madison has been slowly poisoning your children for months. What wouldn't she do? He stood there, bottles in hand, looking like a man watching his entire world collapse. Then his jaw set and something cold and focused replaced the shock. The office, Madison's office. She keeps everything backed up on a hard drive. The office was locked too. But Ethan didn't bother picking it this time. He kicked the door in, wood splintering around the lock inside. Everything was pristine white except for the black external drive sitting on the desk. Ethan plugged it into the computer, files loaded, hundreds of them, meticulously organized. Financial records, legal documents, and a folder labeled insurance. He opened it. Inside were medical records going back over a year, Claire's prenatal care, notes about premature labor, reports about the baby's development. But interspersed between legitimate documents were others' consultations with doctors Madison had seen privately. Prescriptions filled under false names, research on infant sedation, on trust law, on what constituted medical incapacity in minors. Jesus Christ, Ethan breathed. There were emails too. Dozens of them, between Madison and a lawyer in Jackson Hole. The correspondence was careful, coded, but the intent was clear. Established that the triplets were developmentally compromised. Get medical professionals to document concerns. Position Madison as the stable guardian who could manage the estate until alternative arrangements were made. She was building a case, Daisy said, reading over his shoulder. Making them sick enough to seem damaged, but not sick enough to die, at least not right away. Why? Ethan's voice broke. Why go through all this? The inheritance, your estate, control. Daisy scrolled further. Look at this one. The email was from 6 months ago. Right after Claire died. Situation resolved. Now focus on the children. Patience is key. Situation resolved. Like Claire's death was a problem that got fixed. Ethan stood up so fast his chair fell over. I'm calling the police. Wait. Daisy grabbed his arm. Look at the dates on these files. They've been modified. Madison could claim they're fake, that we planted them. Then what do you suggest? We need her to confess. On record. Daisy's mind was racing now. Pieces clicking together. She thinks she's won. Thinks I'm discredited, and you're too grief-stricken to question her. We use that, Doctor. Morrison arrived 17 minutes later. A gray-haired woman in sweats who took one look at Ethan's face and started examining the babies without asking questions. She drew blood from each one, working with the efficiency of someone who'd seen emergencies before. "These bottles," she said, holding up the unlabeled ones. "What were they being used for?" "We don't know," Ethan said. "That's what we need you to tell us." She unscrewed a cap, sniffed, dipped a testing strip inside. Her expression darkened. "This is chloral hydrate, a sedative. Definitely not something infants should be ingesting." Daisy felt vindicated and sick at the same time. "How long would it take to see effects?" "Depends on dosage. Small amounts over time could cause the symptoms you're describing. Excessive sleepiness, irritability when awake, developmental delays. Larger doses." She looked at the babies. "Larger doses could be fatal. Test their blood," Ethan said. "I need documentation of exactly what's in their systems." "While Dr. Morrison worked," Ethan called his lawyer, then the sheriff. Daisy sat with the triplets, watching their small chests rise and fall, thinking about how close they'd come to losing everything. The sheriff arrived with a deputy, both of them looking skeptical until Ethan showed them the hard drive contents and the bottles. And their expressions changed. "Where's Ms. Pierce now?" Sheriff Rodriguez asked, filing a missing persons report on the children. Ethan said, which was bullshit, because Daisy had them in the barn the whole time. The sheriff looked at Daisy. "You took the children from the house. The nursery window was open during a storm and they were screaming. I got them to safety." She met his eyes. "You can arrest me for that if you want, but I'd do it again." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Let's table that discussion for now. I want to talk to Ms. Pierce when she returns." They didn't have to wait long. Headlights swept across the front windows 20 minutes later. Madison's voice carried from the foyer, high with panic. "Sheriff, thank God you're here. Have you found—" She stopped in the doorway of the living room, taking in the scene. Ethan with the babies, Dr. Morrison packing up blood samples, the sheriff standing with his arms crossed, and Daisy sitting on the couch. "Very much not arrested. What's going on?" Madison's voice was steady, but Daisy saw the calculation behind her eyes. "We need to ask you some questions," Rodriguez said, "about the children's care, of course." "Anything." Madison moved into the room like she owned it, which technically she almost did. "Though I'm confused why Daisy is here. She was removed from these bottles," Ethan interrupted, holding them up. "What are they?" Madison barely glanced at them. "Vitamin supplements. For the baby's development, really, because Dr. Morrison says they contain chloral hydrate, a sedative." For just a second, maybe half a second, Madison's mask slipped. Then it was back, confusion and concern perfectly blended. "That's impossible. Those aren't mine. They were in your bathroom cabinet. Anyone could have put them there. Daisy had access to." She stopped, seemed to recalibrate. "Actually, this makes sense now. The accusations she was making, the paranoid behavior. She must have planted those bottles to frame me. It was a good defense. Would have worked, probably, if they didn't have the hard drive." Ethan pulled out the computer, turned it so Madison could see the screen. "Explain these emails, the consultations with doctors about sedating infants, the legal research on trust law and medical incapacity." Madison's face went very still. "Where'd you get that?" "Your office. Your hard drive. You had no right. I had every right. These are my children you've been poisoning." Ethan's voice was quiet. "Deadly. My wife you helped kill." "That's insane, is it? Because we have Claire's medical records showing sedative markers 3 days before her accident. We have your emails discussing resolving the situation. We have months of documented evidence of you systematically drugging 3 infants." The room was silent, except for the babies making small sounds in their sleep. Madison looked at each person, the sheriff, the deputy, Dr. Morrison, Ethan. Daisy Ann seemed to realize she was cornered. "You can't prove anything," she said finally. "Actually, Dr. Morrison said, holding up vials of blood, "I can." Madison Pierce was arrested at 4:47 a.m. on charges of child endangerment, attempted poisoning, and conspiracy to commit fraud. She didn't go quietly. "This is insane," she screamed as the deputy read her rights. "Ethan, you know me. You know I would never hurt those children. This is all her." She jabbed a finger at Daisy. "That trailer trash has been trying to ruin me since day one." Sheriff Rodriguez's hand tightened on Madison's arm. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down." "I won't calm down." She broke into my office, planted evidence. "Stole those babies, and you're arresting me." Madison's perfect composure had shattered completely, revealing something ugly underneath. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "My family's lawyers will bury all of you, your family," Rodriguez said quietly. "It is currently under investigation. Seems your aunt was a nurse at County Hospital back in 2001. Same hospital where a baby went missing, same hospital where Claire Caldwell's adoption records were sealed. Madison went still. Funny how these things connect, Rodriguez continued. Now, you can make this easy or hard. But either way, you're coming with us, as they let her out. Madison locked eyes with Daisy one last time. The hatred there was pure and absolute, a glimpse of what had been hiding behind the masks all along. Then she was gone, and the mansion felt like it could breathe again. Dr. Morrison stayed until dawn, monitoring the baby's vital signs. The blood tests would take a few days to come back, but she was confident they'd show exactly what Madison had been administering and for how long. They're resilient, she told Ethan, packing up her medical bag. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for. With proper care and no further exposure, they should recover fully. Thank you, Ethan said, his voice rough with exhaustion. For coming, for believing us. Thank her, Doctor. Morrison nodded at Daisy. Most people would have walked away when it got hard. She didn't, after the doctor left. Ethan and Daisy sat in the nursery watching the sun come up through windows that were now securely locked. The babies slept peacefully, their breathing even and natural for the first time in months. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally, for not listening, for not seeing what was right in front of me. Daisy pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. You were grieving. People in grief are easy targets for people like Madison. That's not an excuse. He looked at her. Really looked at her. You risked everything. Your job, your freedom. You could have been arrested for kidnapping. They're worth it. Something passed between them then, an understanding. A recognition of what they'd been through together, not romance, not yet. Just the solid foundation of knowing someone had shown up when it mattered most. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and media attention that descended like locusts. The story had everything. Wealthy rancher, beautiful villain, endangered babies, heroic waitress, riverside. Wyoming had never seen anything like it. Daisy found herself at the center of attention she'd spent her whole life avoiding. Reporters camped outside her trailer. People she'd served at the diner for years suddenly wanted to be her best friend. The mayor called her a hero at a town council meeting. It was overwhelming and exhausting and everything she'd never wanted. But Buck helped run interference, and Ethan's lawyer made sure she had legal protection. And slowly the circus moved on to the next story. The blood tests came back conclusive. All three babies had traces of chloral hydrate in their systems, consistent with regular low-dose administration over several months. Combined with the evidence from Madison's hard drive and testimony from several doctors she'd consulted, the prosecutor's case was ironclad. Madison's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor declined. People need to see that you can't hurt children and buy your way out of consequences, he told the press. Doesn't matter how much money you have or who your family is. Justice applies to everyone. The trial was set for 6 months out. In the meantime, Madison remained in county jail, bail denied due to flight risk and the severity of the charges. Ethan threw himself into being a father with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. He hired a proper nanny, a grandmother named Rosa, who had 30 years of experience and took zero nonsense. He moved his office home so he could be present. He learned to change diapers and warm bottles and recognize the different types of cries. And he asked Daisy to stay, not as an employee, he clarified. Standing in her trailer on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Madison's arrest, as, I don't know, family, I guess. The babies need you. And he stopped. Looking uncomfortable, I need you to teach me how to be what they need. Daisy looked around her tiny trailer, at the life she'd built from scraps and stubbornness. It wasn't much, but it was hers, the first thing that had ever truly been hers. I can't live in the mansion, she said. It's too much. Too big. There's a cottage on the property, 2 bedrooms, full kitchen. It's been empty for years. But we could fix it up. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. You'd have your own space, your own life, but you'd be close enough to help with the babies. And he stopped again, searching for words. You'd be safe, which matters to me. More than I know how to say. The cottage needed work, new paint, updated appliances, windows that actually sealed. But it had good bones, and a view of the mountains that made Daisy's chest ache with something like hope. She moved in on the 1st of October. Rosa helped her pick out furniture, taught her how to make her grandmother's green chili stew, and never once treated her like charity case or interloper. Just family. The babies thrived. Noah's digestive issues disappeared. Liam's fever stopped. Ellie started hitting developmental milestones she'd been missing. babbling and reaching and smiling, that gap-toothed baby grin that could light up a room. Daisy fell into a rhythm, mornings helping Rosa with the babies, afternoons in her cottage working on the GED she'd never finished, evenings usually ending up in the mansion's living room with Ethan while the triplets played on their mat. They talked, slowly and carefully, about Claire, about the woman Ethan had loved and lost, about the adoption that had brought her into his life, about the secrets that had gotten her killed. "The prosecutor thinks Madison targeted Claire specifically," Ethan said one night, staring into the fireplace. "That her aunt was involved in Claire's adoption. And when Claire started digging into her birth family, Madison saw an opportunity to what? Marry you and kill your wife to position herself for the inheritance. Claire's family had money, old California money, the kind that never runs out. When she married me, our estates merged. If something happened to both of us and the kids were deemed incompetent." He shook his head. "Madison would have controlled everything. But why go through with the pregnancy if she was planning to?" Daisy couldn't finish the sentence. "Insurance. Maybe your timeline. The babies were premature. Maybe Madison accelerated her plan when Claire started asking too many questions about her past." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn low. Finally, Daisy said, "The prosecutor mentioned reopening the 2001 case. The missing baby they are. Madison's aunt Helen Crowley worked in the maternity ward. She disappeared right after the baby went missing, resurfaced in California a year later with a new identity." Ethan looked at her. "Your mother was a nurse there too, at the same time, I know." Daisy touched her locket. "I've been thinking about it a lot, about what she might have seen, what she might have known. About why she disappeared. The investigator found something," Ethan said carefully, "in old hospital records. Your mother filed a complaint 2 weeks before she vanished. Said she'd witnessed irregularities in the adoption process." Daisy's breath caught. "So she didn't just leave?" "No, I don't think she did. The implications hung between them. Heavy and painful. Rose Carter had seen something, reported something, and disappeared as a result. And somehow, 23 years later, her daughter had ended up in the middle of the same family's crimes. We'll find out what happened," Ethan promised, "whatever it takes. You deserve to know." Winter came to Meadowridge with snow that turned everything clean and white. The triplets had their first birthday in December, and half the town showed up to celebrate. Buck brought a cake, Rosa made tamales, Dr. Morrison gave them each a stuffed animal. Daisy watched Ethan with his children present, engaged, learning to laugh again, and felt something unfurl in her chest. Not love, not yet, but possibility, the sense that maybe, after 24 years of not belonging anywhere, she'd found a place where she fit. That night, after everyone had gone home and the babies were asleep, Ethan found her on the cottage porch watching snowfall. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on them, on us. I couldn't." Daisy looked at him. Their family, and somehow, impossibly, they were. Spring came to Wyoming like a promise kept. Daisy stood in the mansion's great room, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as the mountains shed their snow and turned green again. Outside, Ethan was in the yard with the triplets, now 15 months old and mobile enough to be dangerous. Noah was trying to eat dirt. Liam had discovered the garden hose. Ellie sat in the grass pulling up dandelions with scientific precision. Rosa appeared beside her with 2 mugs of coffee. "You should be out there." "I am out there. Just from in here, that's not what I mean." Rosa gave her that knowing look she'd perfected over 6 months of living in close quarters. "He's a good man. That one, and he looks at you like you're something precious." Daisy felt heat creep up her neck. "We're friends, that's all, friends," Rosa snorted. "My husband was my friend for 2 years before he finally got brave enough to kiss me. Sometimes the best love grows slow." Before Daisy could respond, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe to accept. "Miss Carter, this is Detective Ellen Reeves with the state police. I'm calling about the Rose Carter case." Daisy's hand tightened on the phone. "Did you find something? Can you come to the station? There's something you need to see." An hour later, Daisy sat across from Detective Reeves in a small conference room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ethan had insisted on coming. Was sitting beside her now, solid and steady. Reeves opened a file folder. "We've been investigating the 2001 incident at County Hospital. The missing baby, your mother's disappearance, Helen Crowley's involvement." She pulled out a photograph. "This is Helen Crowley." Daisy stared at the picture, a severe-looking woman with sharp features and cold eyes. Madison's eyes, we found evidence that Helen was running an illegal adoption ring through the hospital. She'd identify vulnerable mothers, young, poor, no support system, and pressure them to give up their babies. Then, she'd arrange private adoptions for wealthy families willing to pay premium prices and not ask too many questions. And my mother found out, Daisy said quietly. More than that, your mother was working the night shift when she witnessed Helen taking a newborn from the nursery without proper documentation. Rose confronted her, threatened to report her. 2 days later, your mother disappeared. The room felt very cold. Did Helen kill her? We don't know yet. Helen died 3 years ago, cancer, but we found her personal records, diaries. She was meticulous about documenting everything. Reeves pulled out another document, including this. It was a hospital admission form from 2001. The patient name made Daisy's vision blur. Claire and Whitmore, age 17. Placed for adoption, female infant Claire, Daisy whispered, was one of Helen's adoptions, born to a teenage mother who later died of complications. Helen arranged for Claire to be adopted by the Whitmore family in California. Well-connected, willing to pay for a clean process. Ethan leaned forward. So Claire's adoption was illegal, gray area. The paperwork was technically in order, but the circumstances were questionable. When Claire turned 18 and started asking questions about her birth family, Helen panicked. That's when she recruited her niece Madison, Daisy said. Madison Pierce. Born Madison Crowley, changed her name at 21. We believe Helen told her about Claire's adoption, about the money involved, and Madison saw an opportunity. Reeves pulled out more documents, C-mails, bank records, flight manifests. Madison engineered a meeting with Claire 3 years ago, became her friend, her confidant. And when Claire married Ethan Caldwell and merged 2 substantial fortunes, Madison set her plan in motion. The pieces were falling into place, each one more horrifying than the last. But what about my mother? Daisy's voice cracked. Where is she? Reeves hesitated. That's the part you need to prepare yourself for. Helen's diaries mention Rose several times. The last entry about her is dated May 15, 2001. It says, she stopped, looking genuinely pained. It says R.C. dealt with, problem solved. The words hit like a physical blow. Daisy felt Ethan's hand find hers under the table. Warm and anchoring, we're excavating several sites Helen owned. If we find anything, you'll be the first to know. Reeves closed the folder. I'm sorry, Miss Carter. I wish I had better news. They drove back to Meadowridge in silence. Daisy stared out the window, watching Wyoming blur past, trying to process 23 years of questions getting answered in the worst possible way. Her mother hadn't abandoned her, hadn't chosen to leave. She'd been murdered for trying to do the right thing. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally, his voice rough. God, Daisy, I'm so sorry. For what? You didn't kill her, but my wife Claire, her adoption set this whole thing in motion. If Helen hadn't been running that ring, if Claire hadn't been asking questions, then Madison would have found some other way to be evil. Daisy turned to look at him. This isn't on you or Claire. This is on people who saw children as commodities and mothers as obstacles. They were almost home when Ethan pulled off onto a side road and parked. He turned to face her, his expression raw. After Claire died, I thought I was done, that I'd just go through the motions for the kids until I could figure out how to feel something again. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Then you showed up. Invisible, stubborn, refusing to let anyone hurt what was yours to protect. Ethan, wait. Let me say this. He took a shaky breath. I'm not asking for anything. I know the timing is terrible, and you've got your own grief to process, but I need you to know that you're not invisible to me. You haven't been for a long time. Daisy felt tears sliding down her face. I don't know how to do this. How to be someone people see, then learn with me. No pressure, no expectations. Just stay. Keep being family. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, maybe we could figure out if there's something more. She kissed him, quick, impulsive, tasting like salt and grief and possibility when she pulled back. His eyes were wide with surprise. I'm ready, she said. Not for everything, not all at once, but for this, for us, for trying. His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. They made it back to the mansion to find chaos. Rosa was chasing Liam with a towel. Noah had somehow gotten into the kitchen and was covered in flour. And Ellie was watching both scenes with that serious expression that meant she was memorizing everything for future reference. Your children are demons, Rosa declared. But she was laughing. Our children, Ethan corrected. Looking at Daisy, the word settled into her chest, warm and right. Our children. Our family, our home. That evening, after the triplets were in bed and Rosa had gone back to her quarters, Ethan found Daisy in his study. He was holding a wooden box, old and worn. I found this in the safe, he said, behind some documents Madison had hidden. I think Claire left it for someone to find. Inside was a letter in elegant handwriting and another star-shaped medallion. To whoever finds this, if you're reading it, something has happened to me. I need you to know the truth about my adoption, about Rose Carter, about the woman who helped me when no one else would. Rose was a nurse who witnessed crimes she couldn't ignore when I was born and my birth mother died. Rose tried to stop Helen Crowley from selling me. She failed, but she documented everything. She gave me this medallion, a match to one she wore, and told me that if I ever needed to know where I came from, to find the other half, I kept searching. I found Rose's daughter, Daisy Carter, and I left her information that might help her find her mother. But I also know Helen and her niece Madison are watching me now. If something happens, please make sure Daisy knows Rose didn't abandon her. Rose fought for children until the very end, including me. Rose Carter was brave and good, and she died protecting innocence. Daisy is her daughter in every way that matters. She deserves to know she comes from strength. Please tell her she has family. Tell her about the triplets. Tell her we share blood. With love. Claire. Daisy read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. Claire had known, had found her, had left a trail for her to follow. The medallion, Ethan said softly. Claire's adoption records listed her birth mother's name. Sarah Carter, Rose's sister. Claire was your cousin. The final piece clicked into place. The connection the babies felt to Daisy wasn't mystical or unexplainable. It was blood, family, the thing she'd searched for her entire life, found in 3 tiny humans who'd needed her as much as she'd needed them. Noah, Liam, and Ellie, she whispered. They're my family. Actually mine. Actually ours, Ethan corrected. Spring turns to summer. The prosecutor convicted Madison on all counts, 20 years minimum. The investigation into Rose Carter's disappearance continued, bringing more answers with each passing week. They found her finally buried on property Helen Crowley had owned. Rose Carter had been murdered for protecting children, and 23 years later, her daughter had done the same. On a clear morning in June, Daisy stood in the meadow behind the mansion, with Ethan beside her and 3 toddlers laughing at their feet. Mountains stretched to forever. Sky went on past hope. Now you're home, Ethan said, echoing words she'd once whispered to babies in a dark barn. Daisy looked at the triplets, her blood, her family, her children in every way that mattered, and felt something she'd never felt before: belonging.